Hi, welcome to today's Alteryx video. We're going to take a look at a solution to a common problem that a lot of analysts have out there. And that is where every day you receive one or more files from your source systems that have to be processed into your data mart. So what a lot of the analysts end up doing is every day they log in, check what files have arrived, and then go in and edit their workflow to have the list of files in it that they need to execute. And this gets to be tedious over time. And the answer to this situation is that you can get Alteryx to do this automatically for you. And along the way, it'll actually provide you with some metadata that would be useful for you to present onto any type of data portal that you have. So we're going to look at a couple of things in this one, and it's that we looked in the last video about how a macro can do iterative processing. So we're going to use a macro to do that iterative processing. I have directory input like we did in that previous one that'll get me a list of files, but I also will create a database table that will keep track of the files that are processed. And this is a piece of metadata that will have in it the number of rows that were in that file and the date that it was processed. And then we'll simply use a join in order to deal with what new files are coming along. So to that matter, let's take a look at some of the things that I have already started out there with. And I'm not actually going to build these live because we've been through a lot of the steps that are inside of these, but I want to show you how you can take this workflow and make it even more dynamic. So we have this Incremental Puppy macro, which if you look at it is very familiar with. It takes and has a input widget, a select widget, and an output widget. So this way I can pass in the name of a file. It'll open that and read it and pass it through. A couple of things to note that in doing this to handle possible differences within the data sets themselves, we can do that through the interface designer, properties, and choosing Alter Configure by name and wait until the iteration is done. This way we can allow for unknown fields to come in and then be discarded. But what else I've done is I've gone ahead and in this input is that I've had the full path of the file name put in here, because what I want to do is go ahead and also create that log record so I have two outputs coming out of this macro. I simply summarize it by the file name, I add the current date and time, and I create a separate input through here. As you can see, I've already ran this, and down the bottom you can see that this shows me the number of records and the date and time that this file was processed. This becomes necessary for us to do the incrementals, but it's also very nice to have this in my data warehouse so I know when and what was processed. And then very simply all I'm doing now is just passing the data that is in the standard file back through my output. To show how this works and also to prepare the data, I need to store these in tables. And so rather than actually creating those tables manually, I'm going to let Alteryx do that work for me as well. So I simply have a text input that has in it the first of the incremental files. I'm going to pass that through my macro and bringing me back out my two data streams. One is going to be for the transaction log, and the other one is going to be for the incremental puppy table. And the first time I run through this, I've called this the initial because this actually implements everything, and we can run this very quickly. So what this will do is, because of the options, it will create the table for me with just that first set of records into it. So I make sure that this macro works and the table gets created the way I want it to, and everything looks good. And to verify that, of course, you can bring in your MySQL Workbench, run my two queries here together. And you can see that I have both the incremental puppy table with the 91 initial records, and then here is the transaction log table as well that shows 91 records at that date. So everything looks good, it works. So now what I want to do is go ahead and create the next step, which is just processing the puppy incremental. So all I'm going to do here is just now pass in two files, dataset 2 and dataset 3, and go ahead and append those into the existing tables using my append map. And in the second one, to field for extra records, I've created a custom mapping so that any extraneous fields will be kicked out. But when I run this now, I know that it will work for appending my two extra files to it. I've kept these data sets small so that the Alteryx to MySQL insert works in a reasonable period of time. And as that runs and finishes, we can go ahead and once again take a look at the query. And you can see that now there are two records in the log, or actually three records in the log, 1, 2, and 3 with the respective record counts. And then all that data can be found in the puppy table as well. So now I know that the incrementals work. I now want to make this more sophisticated so that it can deal with the data sets as they come along. Windows is great. It's managed to shut down all of my other windows. I'm not exactly sure why it did that. So what we want to do is take and start with this workflow and make it so that it can process Delta files and go ahead and utilize the existing log table to let us know what to run. So to do that, I'm simply going to make a copy of the initial one, because I know this works. But during development, I am not actually going to insert this data coming out the backside. So I want to get a chance just to look at it before it runs. So we'll pre-delete the connections between the macro and the output so I can just look at it. So what I need to do is I need two files. Well, one is going to go ahead and come from the MySQL with a standard input data, and the other one is going to be this directory over here that will give me a list of the files that are on my hard drive and ready to be processed. So that you don't have to watch me type this in, I'm again just going to paste these two input widgets. We now also do not need this input, so it's gone. So we sort of have things standalone right here. So in here I have an input that will read the transaction log table, and then one that will go ahead and do the directory of all of the incremental puppy data ready to go. So I've run these two together. So you can see that this brings down and limits the workflow to be just the tables that have already been processed. This becomes a list of all the tables that could be processed. And all I want to know is which ones are new. Now, if you looked at one of my other videos, this is a great case where on the mainframe, on the database server, I would actually be using a minus, but since I don't have a minus, I'll go ahead and drop a join in here. It's just a standard join that I know that I can code to be the minus. So I drop it over here, dropped in the left side, which is the list of files, drop in the right side, which is a list of all files, join them by file name. When I run this, I know that on the left are all the files that are not in the directory. You might want to save this just to show what may have gone away. But again, we wouldn't want to process them anyway. In the join, I have the files that are still in the directory but have already been processed. And on the right, I have all the files that will need to be processed in this increment. So I have 4, 5, and 6. 1, 2, and 3 have been done. I'm going to go ahead and hook this up. The data flow is the right. Also give it the file name. Usually by default it remembers file name is in the flow, so that matches up. Things are ready to be run.